Imagine this, you're a sales leader. You have a complete turnover of your sales team, meaning you have to hire all new salespeople. You're probably panicking, right?
Yikes. Yeah, that's scary.
Well, what if I told you there's a company out there who experienced complete sales team turnover, but they dramatically increased their sales?
I Tell me more about it. I want to hear all about that.
Well, we're going to talk to the Strauss team and they're going to tell you how they did it.
Welcome back to Endless Customers. I'm your host, Alex Winter, and today on the show, we have some very special guests, and I'm going to turn it over to one of our coaches and trainers, Lindsey Auten here at Impact. Lindsey, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Alex, it's good to be back, but I am not the special guest today. I brought some friends with me.
You're not the special guest? What?
No, not the special guest. My friends from Strauss are here. I've been working with them for a while now, and even though I know them pretty well, I'd love for them to introduce themselves. So, Lee and Zach, can you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what your day-to-day looks like at Strauss? And maybe explain a little bit what Strauss does too, for those of the audience who are not familiar with the company. So, Lee, why don't we start with you?
Hi, thank you, Lindsay. I'm Lee, and the Strauss's content marketing manager. So my day-to-day typically looks like writing articles, checking the website analytics. I interview a lot of our subject matter experts, which in our case are typically engineers. Strauss, I'll give you my elevator pitch. Strauss is a converting company, which basically means we buy these big rolls of adhesive, like tapes, films, foils, any flexible materials, and then we cut them down in these little specialized parts like that go inside of medical devices, automobiles, and all sorts of fun, cool stuff like that.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
Very cool.
Zach, what about you?
Sure, I will hop in. Well, hello, Lindsay. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Tracey. I'm the Central U.S. Territory Manager for Strauss. My day-to-day looks something like a mix between a project manager and sales. Is really how I shake it out. So, I'm the first point of contact on new business opportunities with Strauss. Kind of guiding them through that pre-discovery to discovery to solution development phase, facilitating those conversations between our engineering team and the end user, and then kind of bringing them through to a buying decision. And my elevator pitch for Strauss would be just in the breadth of the industries we serve. So really the flexible materials can be anything that's sourced on a roll. And, I might be working on a project with an aerospace company, with a defense company, with a automotive company, with a medical company, and it's not even 8 a.m. yet. So that's kind of how it breaks down for us.
Wow. Very cool. Well, welcome to the show. It's great to have you both on. Lindsey, I think a good place for us to start, because I am excited to hear more about Strauss and your journey. We always talk a lot in Endless Customers about how important it is to have a revenue team and the importance of having your marketing and your sales working together as one. So can we start there with how you got that buy-in and how both of these teams started to work together to create the content and all the things that you're doing nowadays? And Lindsey, how you got everyone to play nicely in the same sandbox?
Um, well, Alex, I think the before we dive into that, it's important maybe to address like what a revenue team meeting is,
Okay.
and why it's important. And just to quickly define that is it's a meeting where the sales and marketing and possibly service teams, if service is important to your customer relationships and the ongoing value, like if you have any opportunities for retention or upselling, service was a good, would be a good component of that. But it's the teams that interact with customers that come together and basically identify challenges, problems, ideas, anything that can help the sales team and evolve the content strategy so that it speaks more true to like what people are actually asking about. And generally speaking, when this meeting comes to fruition, when it happens for the first time, marketing is really excited about it and sales does not really care, if I'm being blunt.
Okay.
And so for someone like Lee, who's the content manager, who's like all excited to have this meeting, it can be a challenge to pick the right agenda that's going to get sales to buy in. And I think that's something that Lee has done exceptionally well, which is why when we were talking about this topic and we were thinking about what team makes sense to bring on and talk about revenue teams and sales and marketing cohesion, the Strauss team was frankly the first team that I thought of. And so I would love to hear from Lee's perspective when you were first approached about the idea of a revenue team meeting. How did you take on that challenge?
Well, I feel very flattered that we were the first people you thought of. Um, it was interesting when I think when I first came on, they sort of had it in mind where it was already sort of being talked about. Hey, we want to join the sales and the marketing teams together and see what we can do together and try and create this cohesive content strategy that's going to last. We have a very long sales cycle, so you have to account for all of that throughout, of course. Um, but when we first started the revenue team meetings, like it was very, I mean, it's a very stressful thing because I show up, I'm new, and I walk in and I'm like, yeah, guys, like you guys know your industry super well, and I kind of know what we do here, and let's all like talk about like how well you're selling stuff. And it's like so it can be so miserable. But like the truth is it's very it very much just needs to be a meeting that benefits everyone. So I think that over time I learned to relax into it, and I would go around and just figure out what people wanted to talk about and figure out where the problem areas were that we actually did need to address. And I think that we managed to boil it down to that.
Yeah, Lee.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Alex.
I was gonna say, Lee, that does sound intimidating at times, especially that first kickoff meeting. One, how did you? This is a two-part question. One, how did you power through that and find the strength to like keep digging deeper and to keep pushing forward? And then two, how did you start to get that buy-in? Because I feel like having an outside perspective. I know you said like you were new to all these salespeople that had been there for a long time. How did your like fresh perspective help kind of change the conversation and push it into the direction it is now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that when I first showed up, a lot of what I learned was the need for preparedness, I guess, when it came to the meetings. I think that in terms of figuring out what to do each meeting and how to step in and be the one learning how to navigate the room, I guess, when you're in there and you're trying to give everyone a voice and when you're trying to make sure that everyone's getting the time to voice their concerns and voice their things that go well and things that don't go well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that over time I learned how to navigate that better by showing up and genuinely showing an interest in and out of the meetings about what people were up to, about their deals, about how things are going with them, and about whether there are tools that they need or content they need that can genuinely make their jobs better and make their days go smoother.
Right.
And I'm forgetting your second question.
Yeah. So you coming in with a new perspective might have seemed like maybe a little fish out of water scenario, but it also brings some new ideas into the equation and maybe can help bring some new ideas to the table that people aren't seeing. So how did that play into working with the sales team and starting to develop a rapport with this like revenue team structure?
Yeah, so I definitely think a lot of the ideas I had coming in were pretty new. I came in and I was very much like, let's get on video and we're out here and like I'm Gen Z and we're like making TikToks and whatever, and it's no big deal. But for some of these guys, they've never taken a video that wasn't at their like wedding, and that's cool. But like at the end of the day, it's a matter of just like finding that compromise with everyone where you're going to show up and be like, I think there's a way we can make this work for you in a way that's going to be comfortable for you. And we're going to try and make that work as much as possible so that we're giving you the best strategy you need to succeed in your goals.
Very nice. And Zach, I'm just going to bridge over to you here. So what was it like for you as a manager and starting to join these meetings? How did this play out for you and how did it feel for you coming into the mix?
Yeah, so to Lee's point, like I had the one advantage of from the moment I was onboarded, kind of having these they ask you answer principles and going through the Impact Plus training, like that got to be a firm cornerstone of my development and kind of getting scaled up into the role. So, the concept of a revenue team and a revenue team meeting, like as soon as I was learning about that, I was like, oh, this makes sense. And then I was in my first meeting 2 weeks in a role. And we did have more tenure in those meetings when I first started. But it really, like, I just appreciated the moment of, getting to sit back with all my peers in the room. We will bring in engineers, our CEO will sit in sometimes, just getting to have these moments where Lee is either teaching, she's asking questions, or the team is sharing examples of something, they went through an example they used assignment selling, a video they sent, and get to have these like global learning moments. And that happened in my first meeting. There was, bits and pieces of that all over, and I was bought in. I tell Lee, it's jokingly, it's not a joke. The revenue meeting is my favorite meeting of the week because it's nice when you get a meeting when you just know there's like this global, like, hey, we're here to drive revenue, and that is the result we're chasing. That's what all of these people in this room are for. So let's get better together. It's not a don't be afraid to share some feedback or where you maybe thought you could have dealt with something better because we're going to talk about it and we're going to like, encourage each other in a way to like push towards that goal of driving more revenue and getting better.
Yeah, creating that safe space is so important, and I think that's the biggest benefit of having a revenue team is it becomes less critical and numbers driven and much more about helping each other and learning and growing so that you can sell better and build more trust. So it sounds like you're having weekly meetings. And Lindsey, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that right that you guys are on a weekly cadence with your revenue team meetings? Is that what you said, Zach?
It's biweekly.
It's biweekly.
I might have said weekly, but it is biweekly.
Okay, it's biweekly. Yeah. All right. So can I ask? I'm just curious. What made you guys decide to do biweekly, or like how did you set up the cadence that you felt was gonna help the team and like get you guys into the correct rhythm that you needed to create the content?
So we have a very development heavy process because we're taking these customer designs and then we're making them into these, especially like these very complicated parts and things like that. So we have a very long sales cycle. And I think a lot of why we ended up choosing biweekly was just you might not have a lot of development that's able to be shown in terms of the content you've sent out to people over the course of like a single week and I mean, our sales guys they're in contact with so many different people, of course, that there are a lot of developments, but the big developments, I think it just takes a little more time to move between deal stages. So that's why we settled on biweekly.
That makes sense. Lindsey, how was that for you as a coach watching this team start to get into synchronicity and having these meetings and just like having it really all come together? Because it doesn't always come together. It's not as easy. It's easier said than done, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So Lindsey, for you as their coach, how was it watching this unfold?
Yeah, I was really proud of both Lee and Zach in accomplishing the level of revenue team meeting that they've been able to accomplish. Because I think at the time I was working one-on-one with both of you, where we had Zach, you and I were working one-on-one, and then Lee, you, me, and then Joe Bashir, who's the HubSpot trainer on my team, we're working together. And to see the this is gonna sound so cheesy, the dream realized of sales and marketing alignment was so rewarding. And I think what's even more rewarding is the way it's continued to evolve and the way that it's continued to grow at Strouse, because Zach, in the time that he's been at Strouse, is now the most senior member of their sales team, and he is truly a leader in the sales space. And I've seen Lee is the type of person I want to introduce other content managers to who we're in person with at events. And so I've seen tremendous growth from not only the like conceptual standpoint, but from both of them in their development as leaders in not only their space, but in the like endless customer space as well. So for me as a coach, it's very rewarding.
That's amazing. And aside from it being rewarding, there's also been some pretty great results. So how has having these consistent revenue team meetings affected the content and the way that you have your sales conversations? Because you said that your sales pipeline or process is a little bit longer. So what does that look like, and how has that helped your bottom line when it comes to sales?
Yeah, so I think it really came down to planning out content for each stage of the process. I think that for most people, it starts out with just planning it out and figuring out where those big points are, where people like decisions are going to be hinged, and starting there and then working back and trying to create content that's going to be helpful for people at those stages, and then working on bringing people in as well. So it really started out with just asking our sales team from the top level, what questions do you get asked all the time? Like, what issues do people bring to you? What questions do you have to answer? And you have to spend time writing the same paragraph over and over again to the point where you've got it on a copy paste somewhere. And once we had that figured out, and we figured, hey, like that's the best way to help for us to help as like myself and our videographer, Evan, as content creators, is like we can make those pieces after discussing it with the sales team, and then they just have something there that is a ready explanation that's going to help the customer understand everything about what they're asking and help them move along in the process wherever they're at.
Right. Yeah, it's a win-win because it helps your sales team. It shortens the conversations they have, and it also, most importantly, helps the customers because they get what they want faster, it answers their questions faster, it builds trust faster. It's a win-win. That's really cool.
Zach, for you as the person who actually like uses the content in a conversation, do you remember the first article you used And, or I guess let me be more specific. The first article you used that came out of a revenue team meeting and the impact it had on the conversation that you had with the person who you were sending it to.
I actually do remember the very first article I sent for assignment selling, and the customer and the discussion around it. So we had talked about, we were talking about discovery calls and, not just letting the discovery call be a calendar invite, and that's how deep it was, right? And then you just hop on this call with very little, bilateral awareness between the customer and us, right? And information sharing leading up to that. So we have this piece of content that we had developed called the, 10 questions to know that Strauss is going to ask you during your discovery call, to kind of give them a list of like, hey, like here's the things we're going to talk about and what's going to be essential for us to get an accurate idea of what you're trying to do or change and how we can help, get you there as long as we have this information. So being that I was newer, I didn't have as much, industry or like niche experience to like rely on. So I was thinking like a buyer as much as I could because I would be like, oh, I don't know the answer to this. So do we have any content that's going to help, tell this story and, paint the path of this journey for them? And I remember sending a new lead that article very early in the sales process. And I was like, hey, like, thanks for reaching out. This sounds like something we would love to talk to you guys about. I'm going to send you this article with 10 questions about, some things that are going to be really important for us to discuss in the discovery call. So if you have some time to collect your thoughts and bring that with you, that's going to make sure we're going to have a really impactful call that's going to help us get you a solution in a way that's, quick, expedient to your needs and your timeline. And the response to that was, I believe the same day I got a Word document from them a day before the call with those 10 questions answered in a sheet, basically telling us every single detail, whether it was a technical spec, whether it was a question about where they were in the process, what was the compelling reason for them, reaching out to us. And that was a huge unlock point because that was very early, and I don't think everyone gets that lucky because assignment selling works. It might not work that well on your very first try
Right.
for every single person,
Right.
but it did for me, and that was the proof is in the pudding. So I was like, oh, now we have all this information. Our engineers are like, wow, this is awesome. Like, yes, we can help them. So here's what we're going to prepare and propose on the meeting. And we went from, a new company reaching out to having a pretty aligned idea of what they were trying to do and a solution that we could offer within like 10 days, which for us was like much quicker than our average sales cycle. So from that point on, I was like, all right, this is the way. Like I can see the results. I can see the why. Like
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah, you were bought in immediately. I don't, and how can you blame you? I would have felt the same exact way. So I just have to ask this, right? Just based off that story, before you came to Strouse, had you had sales experience in the past, and have you ever done anything like this, where like you made some content like this and it just worked, or was this the first time you really had this sort of like aha moment and it just all came together?
Yeah, on the B2C sales side, like or B2B sales side, I'd say yeah, this was kind of the first moment for me. From what I had done prior was on like an executive leadership level, more on the operations side of things. So the
Okay.
conversations we were having about sales and results, it was very macro, it was very data driven. It was less personalized and specific to the issues that someone was facing. So this was like, a much smaller scale from what I was used to, but seeing that buy-in, from the customer to immediately be like, oh, that makes sense. I want to provide that information so this goes well.
Right.
That kind of set it off for me.
Very cool. Very cool. So I have a stat here, and I have to ask this because we're talking about sales. It says that at one point in your journey that you had a full sales team turnover. Lee, my hair standing up on the back of my neck just thinking about that. That sounds like a pretty stressful situation to be in, and you navigated it very gracefully, and you've re-upped your sales team, and you've implemented this revenue squad team meeting that you're having on a regular basis, and it seems to be working better than ever. So how did you navigate that? And for everyone out there watching and listening that may be having some struggles with their sales team or whatever the case may be, what advice could you give them to just help them? Because sometimes things don't always go according to plan. So how did you just navigate through all this and just paint that picture for us?
Yeah, it could definitely be a very, very shocking process, I
Yeah.
think, when something that big happens, and it does rock your organization a bit. But at the end of the day, I think that what really helped us get through it was sticking to the process, I suppose, which is very difficult to say when part of the reason why, some people are leaving is we're doing things that aren't comfortable to them and don't fit into the way that they're used to selling. There's so many people who have been doing their job for years and years, and it's a very hard thing to come in and say, we want you to try things very differently than what you're used to, and they all gave it a great try, and many of them, were doing well as well, with this new process. But at the end of the day, it's just not always going to be fully compatible with every person. And there's so many companies out there who are not doing it this way, and, going through this new process that, maybe it's not always a good fit. But at the same time, the thing that really helped us get through it was, at the end of the day, bringing in people, and just from the get-go, we're saying, this is the way we do it, and we know it works, and I'm going to show you the proof that it works so that you understand we're for real about this, and that sales and marketing are going to be able to work together to, make everything as best as we possibly can.
Yeah. And I think Zach is a perfect example of that. Someone who's coming in that has the buy-in, starts to work the program, and clearly it has worked out exceptionally well. What about with Lindsey? So how was it for you having a coach? Do you feel like having somebody to be able to bounce these ideas off of, to have a companion when you're maybe having some of these tougher conversations and navigating some of these tougher times, how did that help you as you were going through this process?
You guys can be honest. You don't have to say all nice things about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She yelled at me.
Well,
She's fun.
Well, I thought from my perspective, and this is just a core value of mine, is like I don't like to do things just to do them. Like you got to explain the why to me. I got to be bought into it. Like, I don't want to just do something because it's what we're doing it. And if I can't see the results or the reason, like I'm going to be a tough sell.
Yeah.
So, getting up to speed on what was, endless customers, and they ask you answer, and these principles, and they're having revenue team meetings. And then to have these sessions with Lindsey where, we might shoot a one-to-one video and I'd be like, look, like, I don't know that the video worked in this instance like we thought it should. Or maybe like I think there's a way that could work better, or is there a use case for video that's different than what we thought of? And you're just being able to be like, hey, like have those honest conversations about where we see it working really well and where maybe we need to think different about these things and try a different strategy. That was huge, right? Because it's not as easy. And I think everyone on this call, and probably everyone who's listening to this podcast, knows this. Like you can't just lay out a blanket criteria or process and not change, adapt, or optimize it at all for your business. Like you're going to have to customize it at some level, right?
Yeah.
And to just be able to have those conversations as I'm learning it, to be like, hey, like, is there a different way we can approach this or look at it? And to have her experience in Lens, to kind of guide me through that as I was learning it, like that was invaluable, because then I was constantly getting the why and my feedback, if there was any, from the real life application, we could address, our direction moving forward based off of that.
Yeah.
And I was never going to, I will say this may be more indicative of my coaching style, is I'm never going to go into any kind of relationship and be like, you have to do it this way because it works 100% of the time. I'm willing to admit when something I've suggested doesn't work. And as a coach, you have to, in my mind, in my philosophy, you have to be able to say like, okay, we tried it, it didn't work. What did we learn? And we move on and we improve. And when Zach and I first started working on video specifically, their boss, Zach and Lee's boss, Scott, had already like expressed where he's had some examples of bad one-to-one video that was sent to him. So he was very cautious about implementing one-to-one video with his customer base because he didn't want that same like obnoxious experience to happen to them. And so, Zach, I think we trialed and errored a lot of styles of one-to-one video types that like you said, some worked, some didn't work. And it was I love it when something like that is a collaborative process, because there are things that we talked about in our sessions that I can take and bring to other teams from a concept standpoint and be like, hey, this worked, this type of video worked for this team. Could it work for your team as well? And see how that takes hold in other organizations.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Lindsey. And we talk a lot about video, and you've been on the show in the past to talk quite a bit about video, and you're in good company with Austin and myself here in studio. But I've never really thought about it where like one-to-one video is a perfect example of like what works for Strouse and what Scott, the CEO, wants to see from like a tone and culture perspective might be very different than another company's. And that doesn't mean that a one-to-one video has to change drastically, but like the way that it's done, the style of it is going to vary based on the specifics of each company. And it has to be custom tailored to do so. And that's a really interesting point. I don't know if we've ever talked about that. So I think that's just a really cool thing to highlight here.
Lee, what about your perspective on the like coaching aspect of it? Because you've worked with a lot of different members of the Impact team, not just me. So you've received a lot of different styles of coaching and areas of coaching over your time working with Impact and working with Strouse.
Well, I think that especially like coming from a writing background, it's sort of, you get used to hearing a lot of different perspectives is a good thing. I think that's like the mentality I had going into it. So it's kind of been nice to work with a lot of different coaches because I get so many different perspectives on what we're doing and how we're going to be doing it. And obviously there is like the overarching goal, but you know, everyone's going to be coming at it from a different place. But I've really enjoyed working with y'all because I think that whenever I come to y'all with a goal of what we want to do, I think that a lot of the time what happens is y'all are working on your end to plan things, we're working on our end to plan things. And when we're both like doing that and we come together and I say, here's our objectives, and y'all say, you know, here's what we want to help you do, we're able to meet in the middle and find something really nice that's going to work for us and drive results for us as well.
That's awesome. Very cool. Speaking of driving results, this is a great segue. What results have you been seeing since you've implemented all these changes and going through the process you've been through? What are your traffic and leads and sales looking like? Like, can you take us from maybe before you started training with us to where they're at now, or maybe like before the turnover to where they are now? I'd just love to hear some numbers and paint that picture. It'd be really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about our traffic that's coming in, before, I'm like thinking of the whole thing, thinking of the big picture here. So I've been working here for about 3 years. When I first started here, ever since then, it was on the up and up for sure. Like our traffic, as we went through the process and we were creating this content and we're optimizing the content to be the best it can be and, you know, have, you know, originally we're like, you know, seeing if we can fit the keywords in there as well, the rank and doing all of your classic tips and tricks and everything. But then, of course, Google AI overviews happen. And now it's a very interesting game because what's happened is our traffic has dropped off a bit, but what's gone on is our leads have increased significantly. And so I've seen a lot of other people mention this on LinkedIn. They've been seeing a crocodile type figure in their impressions versus their views. And it's very interesting because it's a different game now, you know, and you see everything changing and you have to learn how to adapt to that. And for us, it's been going still pretty well because we didn't freak out at the signs of the change or anything like that. So, you know, we're getting our leads coming in and we've been able to adapt to it pretty well. And so hopefully, I mean, that's the thing is we just have to make sure that they're quality leads, right? I'm out here fishing and then I turn to Zach and I go, is it any good? So.
And then Zach, what do you say? Where does that conversation go?
Well, I'd say the answer has been yes, more and more. Obviously, you have to keep tweaking things, but
sure.
You know, when I started in October of 2023, you know, with the full, very tenured sales staff, Q1 of 2024 was where that turnover we talked about earlier really took place. But in 2024, you know, we kind of made the decision where my role was going to focus on new business, new opportunities, and we like elevated our customer service team to a customer success model. So just for new sales for 2024, it was a 400% increase year over year from 2023. 400%? 460% to be accurate, but I felt like being that accurate was like a little pretentious.
Wow.
But that's what we saw in the Central US territory, the territory I'm responsible for. So the total business, the existing business stayed there. But that additional level of focus and assignment selling and like, you know, really looking at these leads that we were getting from a different perspective with a different set of tools, like we saw some very real traction. You know, very quickly, you know, as we started to implement those things.
Yeah. 400+%. That's beyond incredible for anyone out there watching and listening. I hope your ears perked up because mine did. That's the dream scenario. Wow. Incredible. Speaking of results, do you guys have some stories you could share with us of maybe some wins that have happened while you're doing this? And I also want to bring into the mix assignment selling. And I think a lot of people out there that listen and watch this podcast know, but Lindsey, I'm going to pull your coaching expertise in here. Do you want to just explain what assignment selling is, and then we'll go give some examples of how this has helped you guys do your job better?
Yeah, so at its base level, assignment selling is the act of assigning a person that you're speaking to, whether you're in customer service, whether you're in sales, you're assigning the person who you're about to have a conversation with a resource to read or watch that the ideas will help further the conversation. So you're basically giving them homework. And the idea is that it's a more educated, more well-rounded conversation that leaves them in a better position to make a decision so that you can move more quickly through the sales cycle.
Nice. I love it. So Zach or Lee, do you have some stories maybe you could share of when assignment selling went really well and it just streamlined your sales process and the sales cycle and it was just a home run?
Yeah, I have an internally focused one that jumps out to me to start with. And it kind of correlates back to what we're talking about with revenue team meetings. I remember when we first started, and I was in these revenue team meetings, we would always review assignment selling examples, right? And sometimes, as we were still gaining that buy-in from the total team, you'd see examples where, maybe we were using it to use it. Or someone was, it hadn't quite clicked for someone yet, where they'd be, sharing an example where they had shared an article, but if you read the conversation and the customer's response, you might think, I'm not sure if that was a direct result of, whether we're trying to guide them down the path of, a successful product launch or where this came from. So we started looking at it from a different a different scope of instead of just use it, instead of, creating the opportunity for people to be using it, we would talk about it from a perspective of hey, if we look at the conversation that led up before it, was going on actively and what followed, what made sense. And it's something that, in my opinion, when it's used well, it's the result of listening well. If I am listening well to a customer, I'm going to think of some content that Lee does a great job of sharing with our team, updates on what's new, what we have in terms of content. I'm going to think of that article. I'm going to think of the context I find myself in with a customer, and I'm going to apply that well. And if it's a result of, listening well, it really, really hits with the customers, because it feels like we are using that content to directly answer or to answer questions that they haven't even asked yet, because we're doing a good job of paying attention in the beginning. And if it's the result of listening well, we found it to, really have a strong impact with our customers as they go through our sales process.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's a great story. I learned something too with assignment selling that I used to do it more open-ended, like how you started off the conversation, where I'd include some articles, but then I wouldn't really give clear direction of please read this. And then in our next conversation, let's talk about it. And you really have to define that and have those clear next steps. Because if you don't, you're sort of half checking the box and you're not really practicing active listening like you were just talking about. Because that's really what it's about, is listening to your customers or potential customers.
We found out that very quickly, giving people a reason to do things. I know there was some study on this, but giving someone a reason to do things, when you boil it down to the pure psychology of it, is what's going to get them to engage with it actively. And like Zach said, it's a full picture. You have to look at, we have so much data on how people interact with our website, how they interact with us. And if we're not using that and using it to its full potential, you're not going to get the full clear picture of where this person's at in their customer journey and why they're coming to us and what they already know and the best way we can help them. So it's very much like Zach said, when our territory managers and our sales team are tuned into where the customer's at, instead of just tagging the content down below, here's a couple links, and then they just say that, no one's going to click that. No one wants to engage with something that's not going to resonate with them. But everyone wants a very personalized experience these days. And if you're offering that and it's useful and it's helpful to them, then that's great.
Very well said. I couldn't agree more. Lindsey, anything else we want to talk about before we start to get into learning lessons in the one thing?
I'm thinking about how do I get more salespeople who I am currently working with? How do I get them to listen better in conversations, and think critically more about the content that we're using, because it is a common miss in assignment selling when you're coaching assignment selling is I can see people using the content, but they don't really understand why they're using it. They're more just using it because it's well, I said so. use it because I said so.
Right.
And I'm wondering, is there a like mindset shift, or is there messaging that needs to happen for them to that can be communicated in a revenue team meeting to better like think of assignment selling as a tool rather than a like requirement. Like yes, we want you to use it as part of your process, but it needs to be a valuable tool for you to fully like make that transition. So I'm just wondering, like Lee, from your perspective, are there any specific agenda points in the revenue team meeting where you feel like it does a good job of creating that dynamic of assignment selling as a tool in your toolbox rather than like a requirement to use?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started putting the meetings together, I don't think there was much of a guideline, so we kind of just went for it and did the same thing a few times and would try out new segments and see if it worked, kind of thing. But what ended up happening was when we started looking at assignment selling, basically I would pull up the assignment selling emails and we would look at that from the isolation of the email itself. People would judge their grammar, people would judge, the way if they knew how to hyperlink. But at the end of the day, what really ended up being helpful was when we transitioned that into, we are going to observe these specific deals and these very specific customers. And because that's what makes it very personalized. And so instead of focusing on the assignment selling aspect of it in that way, what ended up being the most useful for us was focusing harder on the specific deals that are top of mind, and then going over that as a whole and seeing where the pain points were, and then seeing, could we address that with content? Could we address these pain points with content? Could we address the things that are not pain points but come up over and over again? Could we create promotional more so content at the beginning of the journey for that? Because we know that we're winning these types of deals. And so as you get really granular about the type of deals and type of customers that you're working with, you just start to see those holes where content fills it open up. And then it feels less forced for marketing to create content because it's very much needed, and it feels way less forced for sales to use the content because it's also needed on their end.
Yeah, I love
Zach,
that.
do you think you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think as we taught it, for new territory managers, as we went through that turnover period, like, using the examples like, when we talk about Reddit and how the buyers have changed, right? And, what do Lee and Lindsay and, and I do when we want to buy something? We're going to go gather as much information as we can now before we make a buying decision. Correlating our onboarding to that simple principle and like, how it's laid out in Taya, like that clicked for me, and it's clicked for our newer territory managers because that's how they shop. That's how, a lot of these shifts with the consumers and with sales have, that's where we're at right now. So when we correlated it to that, and you shared the use cases for it, it really clicked because it's not something we're doing because it's part of our process. It's something we're doing because we're saying, no, we're going to boldly educate our customers. Like we're comfortable doing that. Like we're not going to just ask questions and not use our voice. Like no, our voice has a place, and it's our job to boldly educate and help our customers on that hero's journey.
Yeah, I love and Alex, we can wrap up in a second, but I would love if Lee could like brag a little bit about the impact your content has had on the industry, because we've had conversations about your competitors a few times. I would love to hear
Yes, I
you
want to hear
talk
that too.
about your articles and how they have impacted the industry.
Yeah, and just
And
to
if
hit.
you're watching this, we know who you are.
Yep.
Well, and just to,
No, the copycats, no. Stay away, stay away.
hey, copycatting is the highest form of flattery, I feel like. And also, I do want to say this because I think it's important right before you go. You guys have said a few times in this episode that you have a longer sales cycle, and you still have figured out a way to be consistent and have measurable wins by doing what you're doing. So I sometimes think we hear that as an excuse, and Lindsay, I'm sure you've heard it a bunch, that like, oh, we have a long sales cycle, we have a certain way of selling, and that may be true, but that doesn't mean you still can't have consistency and you can't have the success that you guys are having. So Lee, with that in mind, could you tell us a little bit about how you disrupted your industry and what you've been doing to set the trend in your space?
Yeah, it's very funny in a business to business type of industry, because especially if you come into it from a creative perspective, because a lot of times the content that you're making might not already exist. And so when you come into it and you're making we talk about this industry disrupting content that we're going to be able to put out. And so we really have been trying to be the leaders in that. And we've been trying to offer the answers that aren't there. And we've been working really hard to make sure that when people are looking for answers through search engines, whether that's Gen AI, whether they're searching through that, or whether they're regular search engines, or whether we're giving the information to them, directly. It's been our goal to just offer up as much as we can because we have the resources to do so. And a lot of our competitors have, some of them have followed suit. We've had people come up to us at shows and talk about, do you guys, do you guys hire out your marketing kind of thing? And we've had people come to us and say, hey, I saw this on another website, and we look and they've kind of, taken it and chat GPT a little bit and put it on their
plagiarism. Lee's being kind. There's been some plagiarism. We've talked about it in our sessions, but there's definitely people looking at Strouse and replicating, in the nicest way of saying it, replicating what Lee has created.
Wow. Wow, that's it. You're doing something right when people start to want to steal your ideas or try to replicate, well, quote unquote, replicate what you're doing out there, and also to have people ask if you can do marketing for their companies while you're already marketing your own company. That's amazing. That's so cool to hear that, and good on you for setting yourselves up to be in a space where you can disrupt your industry. That's what it's all about. All right, so now with that, this is my favorite part of the show. It's time for the one thing. So I'm going to ask each of you, Zach and Lee, what's one thing for people watching and listening that they should take away from this conversation? And if it's okay, Zach, why don't we start with you? I'm curious, what do you want to resonate with people, and what do you want people to take away from this conversation today?
I think if you're chasing revolutionary results for your team, you have to understand you get there by an evolutionary process. A lot of times, you can learn a new methodology, you can get really excited about implementing this and what this is going to look like for your business. But when it comes to implementing it, you got to understand it's going to be iterations. If you're chasing perfectionism, that's not going to equal revolutionary results. But if you're chasing getting better at this one thing, so if you're a company that's sitting there and saying like, hey, like this is a great idea, I'm bought in. Where do I start? I think maybe you take some steps in terms of the articles and the content you're putting out and establishing your thought leadership. Maybe you start coaching your teams on one specific, maybe it's between discovery and solution development, or discovery and proposal price quote. You want to coach those actions. Like if you take small intentional steps, you show the team the score, they're not going to be able to do anything but help but win. If you do that. So, if you gain their buy-in and you take it as an iterative approach, I think that's how you're going to achieve revolutionary results. Like we saw a 400% increase, and that's not something to scoff at or just say like, we don't want to sit here and brag about it, but like that was the results of us just trying to get a little bit better every day with this.
You should brag. 400% is insane. That's absolutely incredible. And anyone out there that hears that hopefully wants the same thing. So well done. Lee, same question for you. What's one thing that you think people should take away from this conversation today?
I think that when you're looking at the marketing and the sales team, you have to keep in mind that you can get to a certain degree when they're both traveling alone, but we've found so much success when everyone is cooperating and we're really together, and not in the yay teamwork way, but in a way where we're putting in very intentional work to make sure that we know what's going on with each other. We very much know what we do in a day-to-day. It's not a point where I'm sitting over there and Zach has no clue, like we're very much in each other's business, and it's a great thing because we need to be that way. We need to understand what the other is doing and we need to communicate, and we need to ask each other questions in order to figure out the best way to move forward as a company and to advance each other's current setup and skills, I think.
Yeah, well said. Lindsey, I'm going to ask you the same question. As their coach and as you've seen them evolve and grow implementing Endless Customers, what's one thing that you've taken away from your time with them and this experience?
Ooh, that's a great question because there's been so much. I think the thing that I would like to emphasize as the thing people should be taking away is that assignment selling is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It is principle-based, which means that the practical application can be different across the board. And so if you're wondering, hey, I've been sending 100 one-to-one videos and they didn't work. Well, why didn't they work? What do your subject lines look like? What does the email around it look like? Have you earned the right to have that level of conversation with them Are you there in the process? Like those are the things that you should be asking yourself instead of just saying, "Oh, well, it didn't work, so I'm going to stop." It's a tool that for you to use and deploy at the correct time. And if you can learn and listen and understand when that correct time is, then you're going to see more success when you implement it.
Absolutely. Mic drop. That is some wisdom right there. Well, Lindsey, Zach, Lee, thank you so much for being on the show and taking the time to share your story with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Alex.
Awesome. Well, you guys are welcome anytime, and I definitely want to keep hearing how your journey goes as you move forward with Endless Customers. But for now, thanks for everybody out there watching and listening. I'm your host, Alex Winter. We'll catch you on the next episode.